Hello everyone, we are Group 3, consists of me, Meirina, and Sheren. We are students from Trisakti School of Management. In this video, we are going to explain about PSAK 50, 55, and 71 along with the implementation at PT Bank Mandiri. So let's begin. We will start with the definition for each PSAK. In PSAK 50, it establishes the principle for presenting financial instruments as liabilities or equity, and for offsetting financial assets and financial liabilities. This PSAK is the adoption of IAS 32 financial instruments about presentations. For PSAK 55, it establishes the basic principle for recognizing and measuring financial assets, financial liabilities, and some contracts to buy or sell non-financial items. This PSAK is the adoption of IAS 39 financial instruments about recognition and measurement. And last, the new one that replaced previous PSAK called PSAK 71. It is the adoption of IFRS 9 financial instruments, which was developed by the International Accounting Standards Board to replace IAS 39. The reason why it is created because the current standard is too complex and inconsistent with the way entities manage their businesses and risks, and differs the recognition of credit losses on loans and receivables until too late in the credit cycle.
Before we jump to the main discussion about PSAK 71, let's take a deeper acquaintance with PT Bank Mandiri. So PT Bank Mandiri is a state-owned bank that established on October 2, 1998 as part of the banking restructuring program implemented by the Indonesian government. The history of this company starts from July 1999. There are 4 state banks were merged into PT Bank Mandiri consists of Bank Bumidaya, Bank Dagang Negara, Bank Ekspor-Impor Indonesia, and Bank Pembangunan Indonesia, and each of which has an integral role in the development of Indonesia's economy. The vision of PT Bank Mandiri currently is to be a preferred financial partner, and the mission is seamlessly integrate our financial products and services into our customers' lives by delivering simple, fast digital banking solutions. PT Bank Mandiri is one of the banks implementing PSAK 71, and PSAK 71 can still be said to be a new regulation because it has just been stated by OJK that it effectively implemented by Indonesian banks on January 1, 2020. The adoption of IFRS 9 or equivalent with PSAK 71 objective is to replace the IAS 39 that equivalent with PSAK 55. So let's see what changes that happen. Based on this case, we discussed 2 changes that contained in PSAK 71. The first is the change in the basis for classification of financial assets. In PSAK 55, the classification is based on the management's intention, while the PSAK 71 will be based on the results of SPPI test and assessment of business model. And the second is the change in principle of allowance for impairment losses. PSAK 71 will use the forward-looking expected credit loss principle to replace the incurred loss principle in PSAK 55. Changes have an impact on PT Bank Mandiri in general. It is the renewal of operational policies related to accounting, and PT Bank Mandiri's internal accounting policies in accordance with the requirements of PSAK 71. Okay, now let's explore each of these changes, starting from the first change, the changes in classification of financial assets. Before that, do you know what a financial asset is? Financial asset is a liquid asset that represents and derives value from a claim of ownership of an entity or contractual rights to future payments from an entity. Currently, we will discuss 2 instruments of financial assets. First is financial assets placed in the debt instruments such as bonds of a government or company, and equity instruments such as stocks. Now here comes the comparison of classification and measurement categories that we got from PricewaterhouseCoopers documentation based on PSAK 55 and PSAK 71. Under PSAK 55, how assets are classified generally determines the basis for their measurement. And the group classified the financial assets into categories: loans and receivables, which measure at amortized cost; fair value through profit or loss, available for sale financial assets, which measure at fair value through other comprehensive income; and financial assets held to maturity, which measure at amortized cost. But under PSAK 71, the basis on which assets are measured is the way they are classified. There are financial assets measured at amortized cost, fair value through profit or loss, and fair value through other comprehensive income. And to classify its financial assets based on PSAK 71, the company used two methods, which based on the company's business model in managing the financial assets and the contractual cash flow of the financial assets by using solely payment of principal and interest test. Let's understand each one. Business model assessment means the group determines its business model at a level that reflects how the financial assets are managed to achieve its business objectives. There are several observable factors to assess the business model, such as performance is how the performance of the business model and the financial assets held within the business model are evaluated and reported to the entity's key management personnel. And the risks means the risks that affected the performance of the business model and the way those risks are managed. And the compensation means how business managers are compensated. And the last, the expected frequency, value, and timing of sales are also important aspects of the group's assessment. And next is solely payment principal and interest test. It requires that the contractual terms of the financial asset give rise to cash flows that are solely payments of principal and interest on the principal amount outstanding that are consistent with a basic lending arrangement. Matters related to this test are: principal is defined as being the fair value of the financial asset at initial recognition, and the interest within arrangement are typically the consideration for the time value of money and credit risks. And to understand this more deeply, let's jump straight into how the company classifies the financial assets. To help us classify the financial assets, we can depend on this flowchart. First, we will discuss for financial asset in form of debt instrument. As I said before, the classification in PSAK 71 should pass two methods. First method is SPPI test that we have talked about. So at this stage, the question that must be answered is whether the contractual cash flow is solely payment principal and interest. To make it easier to understand, let's see the example. So for example, a bank provides loans to customer. After being lent on the first day, the customer must pay in installment to the bank. And the installments given by the customer to the bank are one of the contractual cash flow returns. So what is being tested here is whether the return on cash flow is a return that only reflects the principal and interest. If the answer is yes, we can go to the second method by assessing the business model. There are two questions that must be assessed by looking at investors or customers, whether the purpose of the business model is holding to collect contractual cash flow until the end of the contract period or collect contractual cash flow and sell financial assets before the end of the contract period if he needs cash flow. If the business model is holding to collect the contractual cash flow, then it will be classified as amortized cost. And if the business model is collecting contractual cash flow and selling the financial assets, it will be classified as fair value through other comprehensive income. But if the condition of both methods is not met, then it will be considered as trading and classified as fair value through profit or loss. Next is the financial assets in form of equity instrument. In classifying equity instruments, there are several assessments that must be made. For example, the investor purchases shares on the stock exchange. What we should assess first is whether he held it for trading purposes or not. If it is, then it will be directly measured in fair value through profit or loss. However, if it is not held for trading, then it has an OCI option, meaning that the investor makes an investment for a long time to expect a higher return, but the instrument can be withdrawn or sold at any time when he needs money. If he doesn't select this option, then the instrument will be classified as fair value through profit or loss. Now looking at the 2020 annual report provided, PT Bank Mandiri has classified its financial assets according to the three categories in PSAK 71 as follows. In PSAK 71, it also regulates the reclassification requirements of the financial assets and financial liabilities. So it stated that the group is allowed to reclassify the financial assets owned if the group changes the business model of managing the financial assets, and the group is not allowed to reclassify the financial liabilities. After exploring the changes related to the classification of financial assets in PSAK 71, this implies that PT Bank Mandiri must use two methods, namely the business model assessment and the SPPI test to determine the classification of financial assets. And because of that, the bank reclassify financial assets from previously classified as held to maturity to financial assets measured at fair value through profit or loss with an impact on the revaluation of 1.1 billion rupiah.
The second change is in the principle of allowance for impairment losses. because the implementation of PSAK 71 has caused a change in the method of calculating impairment losses from the incurred loss approach in PSAK 55 with the expected credit loss approach. So what is the difference between the old one, incurred loss approach, versus the new one, expected credit loss approach? In the incurred loss approach, the information included or used are only from the past events and the current conditions. But in the expected credit loss approach, they added new component, which called forecast of future economic conditions. So they also consider this factor for impairment. Generally, all financial assets carry a loss allowance, and no trigger is required for recognizing the impairment. Now for the scope of the impairment from Mandiri's annual report. First, financial assets in other than those measured at fair value through profit or loss. Second, loan commitments or committed unused loan facilities. And last, financial guarantee contract. So the expected credit loss framework will be applied to those assets. There are also several criteria to determine the objective evidence of impairment loss. First, significant financial difficulty of the issuer or obligor. Second, a breach of a contract such as default, delinquency in interest or principal payments. Third, the lender for economic or legal reason relating to the borrower's financial difficulty, granting to the borrower a concession that the lender would not otherwise consider. Fourth, there is a probability that the borrower will enter bankruptcy or other financial reorganization. Fifth, the disappearance of an active market for that financial asset because of financial difficulties. Sixth, observable data indicates that there are a measurable decrease in the estimation. And there are two types of how long we should recognize the expected credit losses. First, 12-month ECL is the portion of lifetime ECL that represents the ECL that result from default events on a financial instrument that are possible within 12 months after the reporting date. Second, lifetime ECL. It is the expected credit losses that result from all possible default events over the expected life of a financial instrument. This impairment consists of three stages to determine how we can recognize the ECL. The stage 1, if at the evaluation date of impairment, credit risk on financial instruments does not increase significantly since initial recognition, we have to recognize 12-month ECL. In the stage 2, if at the evaluation date, credit risk on financial instruments has increased significantly since initial recognition, we have to recognize lifetime ECL. In the stage 3, if at the evaluation date there is objective evidence that the financial asset is impaired, we have to recognize lifetime ECL as in the stage 2. Now we can see the impairment in PT Bank Mandiri. From the annual report, they provide a table called Disclosure of Claims and Allowance by Region from the bank separately, that shows the loss allowances from stage 1 until stage 3. In stage 1, there are more than 11 trillion. In stage 2, more than 28 trillion. And stage 3, more than 22 trillion. For the second table, it shows the loss allowances from bank consolidated with subsidiaries. In stage 1, there are more than 12 trillion. In stage 2, there are more than 28 trillion. And last, stage 3, more than 22 trillion. So, from all these impairment changes, the PT Bank Mandiri have to do the procurement of a new system for recording financial instruments and calculating loss allowances on financial assets based on PSAK 71. Which in result changed the amount of loss allowances that increased by 24.49 trillion. That is all about the implementation of PSAK 71 in PT Bank Mandiri. I hope you can understand it and thank you for watching.